There's something haunting about an old photograph. The way time freezes a face, the way eyes seem to follow you. Eyes that once held dreams, fears, and secrets. Those eyes once belonged to a girl named Mary Tuplin. She was just 17, a farm girl from Prince Edward Island. Ordinary, kind, forgotten by most, except for the way she died. In the spring of 1887, Mary vanished into the night, and 2 weeks later, her body was found floating in the Trout River face down, wrapped in a blanket, weighed down with stones. A single bullet through her neck, and one more secret: she was 6 months pregnant. The town was horrified. The police rushed to find someone to blame, and within weeks, a man named William Millman was tried and executed for her murder. Justice, they said, had been done, but had it? Because as the years passed, the story began to unravel. The evidence was thin, the motives uncertain, and whispers spread that the wrong man had died. Even today, locals still wonder, who really killed Mary Tuplin? Was it a crime of passion, or something more sinister, hidden beneath the quiet surface of a small-town society obsessed with reputation and shame? This is more than just a century-old murder. It's a story about truth buried under fear, about how a young woman's life and death still echo through time. I'm your name. And this is Echoes of Crime. Tonight, we uncover the chilling mystery of Mary Tuplin, the girl whose eyes still haunt history. Before the headlines, before the whispers, before her name was etched into court transcripts and cold case files, Mary Tuplin was just Mary, a 17-year-old girl living in Lot 11, Prince Edward Island, in a modest home nestled along the Trout River. She was the third of 11 children, part of a large, hard-working family that made their living farming the land and tending to the rhythms of rural life. Mary's father, Charles Tuplin, was a man known for his quiet work ethic. He wasn't wealthy, but his hands were calloused with years of honest labor. Her mother, Margaret, juggled the chaos of 11 children with remarkable strength, keeping the house in order and food on the table with what little they had. It wasn't an easy life, but for the Tuplins, it was theirs. Simple, predictable, familiar. And Mary, she was just beginning to step into her own world, in a town where everyone knew everyone. Mary stood out, not for anything loud or dramatic, but for her gentle presence. She was described as kind-hearted, soft-spoken, and dutiful. She helped raise her younger siblings, cooked with her mother, and spent her days walking along dirt paths and helping with chores. There was no luxury, no parties or city lights, just open skies, the sound of horses pulling carts, and the rustling of trees near the riverbanks. But beneath the surface of Mary's quiet life, something more complicated was brewing. She had been romantically involved with a young man named William Millman, a laborer several years her senior. William wasn't an outsider, but he wasn't part of Mary's tight family circle either. And according to later testimonies, their relationship had been tense, perhaps even forbidden. Rumors circulated that Mary's family disapproved of William. Some said he was possessive. Others claimed he was kind but reckless, a man who wasn't ready to shoulder the responsibilities of fatherhood. Because, as it turned out, Mary was 6 months pregnant when she disappeared, and many believe William was the father. This pregnancy changed everything. In a small 19th century community like Lot 11, an unwed mother faced unimaginable pressure. It wasn't just a matter of scandal. It was shame, rejection, sometimes even banishment. For Mary, a girl from a devout and conservative family, the news of her pregnancy would have felt like a weight too heavy to carry. We don't know exactly when her parents found out. We don't know if she ever told them directly. But we do know that by the spring of 1887, Mary was at a crossroads. She was young, pregnant, and increasingly isolated. And in a time when women's voices were often stifled, she had few places to turn. And yet, Despite this emotional weight, Mary tried to carry on. She continued her daily tasks, tending to her younger siblings, feeding the chickens, hanging laundry in the brisk spring air. If she was struggling, she hid it well, or perhaps, like so many young girls before and after her, she simply didn't have the space to fall apart. We also know that Mary and William had continued to see each other in secret. Neighbors reported seeing them together, talking near the edge of the forest, standing close under the dim porch light of the Millman home. Whatever was happening between them, it wasn't over. Not yet. What's most heartbreaking is imagining Mary's inner world during those final weeks. Did she believe that William would marry her? Did she fear what her parents might do when they found out? Was she trying to escape? Or trying to hold on? These aren't just questions. They're the emotional threads of a real life, a real girl, whose story would soon be reduced to court arguments and grainy newspaper columns. And that's what we can't forget. Before the tragedy, before the trial, Mary Tuplin was a daughter, a sister, a teenage girl on the cusp of adulthood, caught in a situation too heavy for her age. She had dreams, too, even if they were never written down. Maybe to have a home of her own. Maybe to raise her child. Maybe just to be seen, heard, and safe. But all of that, her future, her voice, her life, would vanish in the blink of an eye, because on May 28, 1887, Mary walked out of her house for the very last time. And what happened next is where this quiet, rural life transforms into one of the most chilling true crime stories in Canadian history. May 28, 1887, a day that began like any other in the small, windswept township of Lot 11, Prince Edward Island. The sun had risen over the sloping fields and scattered cottages, and for a while the world remained quiet. But by the time that same sun had set, Mary Tuplin was gone, and nothing in her family's life would ever be the same. That morning, Mary was up early. Like most days, she helped with the morning chores. Her younger siblings would later remember seeing her preparing bread dough with her mother, her movements calm, deliberate, as if there was nothing unusual about the day ahead. But there was a subtle undercurrent, something no one could quite name at the time. You see, Mary had received a letter. Some say it was from William Millman, the man believed to be the father of her unborn child. The contents of that letter were never made public, but what we do know is that it seemed to stir something in her. Later that day, Mary would ask to borrow her brother's boots. Not just any boots, but a sturdy pair, fit for walking long distances in damp spring weather. Why the boots? Her brother, puzzled but compliant, handed them over. Mary thanked him and went back to her tasks. Nothing else seemed out of place until evening came. Around 9:30 p.m., Mary quietly slipped out of the house. She told her family she was going to stay the night with her aunt, a completely reasonable excuse. It wasn't unusual for people in small towns to walk to relatives' homes, even at dusk. The sky would still hold a bit of light at that hour in late May. She wasn't expected to be gone long. No one questioned her, but what Mary didn't say was that she had an appointment. An unofficial, secret meeting with William Millman. Some believed she was going to ask him to take responsibility for the child. Others speculated it was something more desperate, a plea, a confrontation, maybe even an ultimatum. We don't know for sure. But we do know that William had allegedly invited her to a secluded area near the Trout River Bridge, and Mary, 6 months pregnant and all, agreed to meet him there. It was the last place she was seen alive. Local farmer later testified that he saw 2 figures standing by the bridge around 10:15 p.m. He assumed they were a courting couple. Their body language seemed close, but tense. He remembered the girl's long dress catching the wind, and how the boy beside her kept his hands buried in his coat pockets. He didn't think much of it at the time. The next morning, Mary's bed was empty. Her family initially assumed she had stayed with their aunt as planned. But when she failed to return by afternoon, concern began to grow. By nightfall, panic had set in. The Tuplin family checked with neighbors. They checked with Mary's aunt. No one had seen her. No one had spoken to her. It was as if she had disappeared into the shadows of the previous night. 2 days passed before they went to the authorities. And even then, the initial search was slow. There was no sense of urgency, at least not from the constables. Mary was a young woman, unmarried, pregnant, and some believed she had simply run away in shame. That idea clung to the case like fog. It was easier to believe she had vanished on purpose than to consider the alternative. But her family knew better. Mary had left her belongings behind. She had no money, no plan, no clear destination. And more than that, she would never have left her siblings. Not like this. 4 days after her disappearance, a group of locals formed a search party. They combed the fields and riverbanks near the Tuplin home. The search was slow, deliberate, and then finally horrific. On June 7, 1887, nearly 10 days after Mary vanished, a fisherman discovered a body in the Trout River, weighted down by stones. It was Mary. Her face was bruised, her dress torn. Her body showed signs of trauma, most notably a gunshot wound to the head. She had been murdered, coldly, silently, deliberately. The news spread like wildfire about the same girl who had baked bread just days ago was now the subject of a murder investigation. Her name was printed in headlines. Her private life dissected. Her pregnancy became a public scandal. Her death a public mystery. And as suspicion began to take root, one name kept resurfacing: William Millman. Friends and neighbors knew about their secret relationship. Some claimed they saw him the night Mary disappeared. One even recalled hearing a sharp, cracking noise, like a gunshot, around 10:30 p.m. near the bridge. The pieces were starting to come together. But they didn't fit perfectly. Not yet. Why would William invite her out that night if he planned to kill her? Was it a crime of passion? Was someone else involved? And what about the letter Mary received, the one she read the day she disappeared? Its contents were never recovered. Some believe it may have been destroyed. Others think it might still be out there, tucked away in an attic or hidden between the pages of an old book, holding the final clue to a century-old mystery. What we do know is this: Mary Tuplin left her home on May 28, 1887, with nothing but hope and fear in her heart. She stepped into the night, pregnant, young, and possibly terrified, and she never came back. What happened on that bridge between 9:30 and 10:30 p.m. remains the most haunting question of all, because in that narrow window of time, a girl became a ghost, a family lost a daughter, and a quiet island town became the scene of one of Canada's earliest and most chilling unsolved murders. The discovery of Mary Tuplin's body on June 7, 1887, sent a cold, collective shiver through the farming communities of Prince Edward Island. A girl barely 17, visibly pregnant, discarded in a river like something to be forgotten, was not only a tragedy, but something most residents simply couldn't fathom. The horror was immediate. But the investigation that followed? It was far from clean and far from conclusive. The local authorities, led by Constable A. E. Davison, responded to the scene once the body was pulled from the Trout River. It was clear from the outset, this wasn't an accident. A bullet wound was found in Mary's head, and stones had been tied to her skirt with twine, weighing her body down beneath the surface. From the start, William Millman was the focus of attention. The moment her identity was confirmed, investigators moved quickly to question William, who had a known connection to Mary, one that was becoming impossible to hide. He had been romantically involved with her for months. Everyone knew it, even if the family never openly acknowledged it. The authorities claimed William had both motive and opportunity. He was believed to be the father of Mary's unborn child. In that era, fathering a child out of wedlock wasn't just scandalous. It could destroy reputations, livelihoods, even families. If Mary intended to demand recognition or marriage, that alone, some speculated, could be a reason for murder. But what raised more eyebrows than anything was how fast things moved. William was arrested on June 9th, barely 48 hours after Mary's body was found. Key to the case were eyewitness reports, but even those came with contradictions. A local farmer, Thomas Reed, claimed to have seen two figures standing near the bridge at approximately 10:15 p.m. on the night of Mary's disappearance. He later identified the man as possibly William Millman, but admitted it was dark and he couldn't be sure. Another local, Isaac Bernard, told police he heard a sharp crack from the direction of the Trout River around 10:30 p.m. At the time, he assumed it was someone hunting. But when news of Mary's murder broke, he revised his story. Yet none of these testimonies placed William directly at the scene. There was no blood evidence, no murder weapon recovered, and no witnesses who saw the actual crime. The Crown leaned heavily on circumstantial evidence. In 1887, forensic science was nearly non-existent, especially in rural Canada. There were no fingerprint records, no DNA testing, no ballistics matching. The bullet retrieved from Mary's body couldn't be matched to any specific weapon. And despite claims that William must have had access to a gun, no firearm was ever found in his possession. There was no written confession, no hard physical evidence tying him to the murder. The case against him rested on three things: his relationship with Mary, her pregnancy, and the public's hunger for someone to blame. Then there's the matter of the letter. Mary was seen reading a letter earlier on the day she disappeared. Some believed it came from William. Her brother even recalled that she looked nervous afterward, distracted, anxious. But the letter itself was never recovered. Where it went, no one knows. Did William take it after the murder? Was it destroyed before she left the house? Or could it have come from someone else entirely? Its absence remains one of the key mysteries of the case, a potential piece of truth lost to time. William Millman was interrogated for hours, but never confessed. He denied killing Mary, claimed he hadn't seen her the night she disappeared, and stated he had been home the entire evening. But his alibi? Weak. His own mother testified that he had gone out briefly that night, but didn't say where. He returned before midnight, looking quiet and pale. Authorities took that as enough to arrest him. The trial began that same summer, drawing enormous crowds from all over the island. It was more than just a legal proceeding. It was a public spectacle. People crammed into the courthouse, eager to hear the dirty details. Newspapers printed daily updates, often focusing more on Mary's pregnancy than the crime itself. The tone of the media was uncomfortably judgmental, portraying Mary as fallen and William as cornered. Sympathy leaned toward the accused, not the victim. Despite the lack of concrete evidence, William was found guilty and sentenced to hang. He was executed on July 30th, 1888, barely a year after Mary's death. But not everyone believed the case was closed. There were rumors. Some whispered that William had been framed, that another man, a prominent community member, had been involved with Mary and needed the scandal buried. Others speculated that Mary had gone to the bridge not to meet William, but someone else entirely. A man with power. A man who could have ensured William took the fall. And then there's the curious absence of any physical investigation into alternate suspects. Once William was arrested, authorities stopped asking questions. No further interviews. No expanded search. No forensic review. In fact, police burned Mary's clothing shortly after the trial, supposedly because of sanitary reasons. But to some, it felt more like an attempt to erase evidence. Over time, public opinion shifted. What had once been a wave of condemnation became a ripple of uncertainty. By the early 1900s, Residents of Lot 11 rarely spoke of the case. Some did believe William had committed the crime, but just as many believed he had been sacrificed to preserve the town's reputation. After all, the story of a farm boy murdering a pregnant girl in a fit of panic was easier to accept than one involving corruption, shame, and the silencing of a young woman's voice. Whatever the truth, it had already been decided the investigation into Mary Tuplin's murder was technically over in less than 6 weeks. A conviction was made. A man was hanged. Justice, they claimed, had been served, but when you look closely, when you strip away the headlines, the court declarations, and the moral judgments, you're left with a very uncomfortable possibility. They might have gotten it wrong, and in doing so, they didn't just fail William, they failed Mary, because whatever secrets she carried into that night, they died with her. And the people who should have been searching for the full truth, they stopped looking far too soon. When you strip this case down to its simplest version, a young, unmarried girl is found murdered, and the man she was secretly involved with is arrested. It's not difficult to understand why many believed they had found the answer. William Millman killed Mary Tuplin. That's the theory that dominated the investigation, the newspapers, the courtroom, and the public's imagination. Even now, more than a century later, some still believe that William was the only logical suspect. After all, he had motive, he had opportunity, and he had something to lose. Mary Tuplin was 6 months pregnant. In the late 1800s, an unwed pregnancy wasn't just a personal crisis. It was a social catastrophe. For a young woman like Mary, it meant possible exile, disgrace, and humiliation. For the man involved, especially someone from a working-class family like William's, it could mean being forced into marriage, losing work, or becoming the subject of relentless community scorn. Many believe that when Mary told William about the pregnancy, or possibly threatened to go public, he panicked. Perhaps she asked him to marry her. Perhaps she begged for help. Or maybe she gave him an ultimatum. Whatever she said, the theory goes, William saw no way out. And rather than face the consequences, he made a fatal decision. He invited her to meet him by the Trout River Bridge under the cover of darkness, and when she arrived, likely hopeful, perhaps scared, he killed her. It's the version of events that seemed to fall neatly into place for the authorities. Witnesses claimed to see a couple that resembled Mary and William standing near the bridge around 10:15 p.m. Mary's body was found with a bullet wound to the head, and William, according to some, had access to a small caliber pistol. His own mother admitted he left their home that night for a brief period and returned looking pale and anxious. A man named Isaac Bernard told police he heard a loud crack near the river around 10:30 p.m. In isolation, each piece of evidence might feel flimsy, but together they formed a compelling narrative, at least on the surface. In court, prosecutors leaned heavily on circumstantial evidence. No weapon was recovered. No one saw William pull the trigger. But the story they presented was so familiar, so believable, that it didn't need concrete proof. A young man, afraid of scandal, kills the girl he once loved. Simple, tragic, done. And for many in the community, that was enough. But then, there are the cracks. William never confessed. Not during questioning, not during the trial, and not in the days leading up to his execution. Even on the gallows, he maintained his innocence. For a 19-year-old facing death, that kind of unwavering denial is unusual, especially in a time and place where spiritual redemption before death was seen as vital. If William had committed the murder, why not confess and seek forgiveness? Why die with the weight of a lie? There was also no physical evidence linking him to the crime. No bloody clothing, no gun, no trace of Mary's belongings in his home. And let's not forget the missing letter. Mary had been seen reading a letter the very day she disappeared, one she reportedly reacted to with anxiety. Her brother remembered her borrowing his boots that afternoon, possibly preparing for a long walk. But the letter itself was never found. Authorities assumed it came from William, but there's no proof it did. If it wasn't from him, then who wrote it? And why? Then there's William himself. Some remembered him as quiet and reserved, not the kind of man to commit violence. He had no criminal past, no history of anger or abuse. Was he cold-blooded, or just in the wrong place at the wrong time? His nervousness after Mary's disappearance could have been guilt, but it could also have been fear of being accused, fear of being misunderstood, fear of becoming the scapegoat. The jury saw it differently, and so did the public. In the absence of other suspects, and with pressure mounting to solve the case, William was an easy choice. He was familiar. He was flawed. And most of all, he was close to Mary. The theory that he killed her to escape the consequences of her pregnancy was one that people could accept. It made sense. It required no further digging, but that's what makes it dangerous, because if any part of that narrative is false, if the letter wasn't his, if he wasn't the one on the bridge, if Mary had been meeting someone else that night, then the entire foundation of the case begins to crumble. And if William was innocent, then not only did the real killer get away, but the justice system executed a young man for a crime he didn't commit. The obvious answer might feel tidy, but in this case, it might also be a tragic mistake. When a case like Mary Tuplin's ends in a conviction, it's natural for people to stop asking questions. A man was arrested, tried, and hanged. That should be the end of it. But when the facts don't fully align, when evidence is thin and inconsistencies linger just beneath the surface, it becomes difficult to ignore what might have been overlooked. There's another theory, one that didn't gain traction in court, and one that's rarely discussed openly. But it lingers quietly in the margins of old court transcripts and whispered family histories. This theory doesn't place William Millman at the center of the crime. Instead, it asks a more unsettling question. What if someone else wanted Mary silenced? It's no secret that Mary's pregnancy was the catalyst for everything that happened. But what if William wasn't the only one with something to lose? What if the father of Mary's child wasn't William at all? It's a theory that makes many uncomfortable. But some locals at the time speculated that Mary may have been involved with a second man, someone older, someone with status. Perhaps a man with influence in the church or the community. Maybe even someone married. The kind of man who, if exposed, would have much more at risk than a young laborer like William. Could it be possible that Mary confided in someone about this second relationship? That she hinted at revealing the truth? And if so, did someone ensure she never got the chance? There's no confirmed evidence to support this version of events. But there are curious details, small, often overlooked fragments that give this theory just enough weight to remain in circulation. Even after more than a century, let's start with the letter. We know Mary read a letter on the day of her disappearance. Her brother said she looked pale afterward, nervous, even distressed. The family assumed the letter was from William. But what if it wasn't? What if it came from someone else? Someone urging her to meet discreetly? If that's the case, then Mary may have gone to the river not to confront William, but to meet another man entirely, someone who never intended for her to leave that spot alive. Then there's the strange lack of investigation into alternate suspects. Once William was arrested, the inquiry essentially ended. Authorities didn't pursue additional interviews. They didn't re-examine the scene. They didn't try to locate the missing letter or investigate who else might have been involved in Mary's life. Could it be that they didn't want to? That the investigation avoided certain questions because the answers might have led too close to someone protected? There are whispers unconfirmed, speculative, that someone in a position of authority may have been connected to Mary, a local figure with both the means to commit a crime and the influence to cover it up. It's hard not to wonder, if Mary had threatened to expose a respected man in town, would the justice system have protected her or protected him? Then there's the matter of the evidence handling. After the trial, Mary's clothes were burned by authorities. The official reason was sanitary precaution, but many believe it was an attempt to destroy lingering evidence, blood patterns, fiber traces, or even fingerprints. Burning the victim's clothing is an unusually permanent act, especially for a case supposedly resolved. What also strikes many researchers is how clean the solution appeared to be. William was arrested almost immediately. The trial happened quickly. And then, just like that, the case was closed. It was fast. Too fast, some might argue. As if someone wanted it buried literally and figuratively as soon as possible. Another unsettling element is the way the community processed Mary's death. While there was public mourning, there was also a subtle tone of blame placed on Mary herself. Newspapers referred to her in veiled language, often focusing on her pregnancy more than her murder. It's possible that this collective discomfort helped authorities justify a narrow investigation. After all, if the public viewed Mary as someone who had already stepped outside the bounds of respectability, were they more willing to accept a quick, clean conclusion? It's important not to sensationalize these ideas. There's no proof that a second man existed. No names ever emerged. No confessions. No direct accusations. But the silence surrounding that possibility speaks volumes. In cases like Mary's, where social shame and gender roles weigh heavily, certain truths were often buried deeper than any body could be. Could someone else have written the letter? Could someone else have met her at the bridge? Could someone out of fear, reputation, or desperation have done the unthinkable? We'll likely never know, but what keeps this theory alive is the sense that the surface never matched the depths. That William Millman's conviction, while legally complete, was emotionally and logically incomplete. That Mary Tuplin may have died not at the hands of a scorned lover, but as the result of a secret that the town wasn't willing to confront. And if that's true, then the real story isn't just a murder. It's a cover-up, a silencing, a girl erased by the very system that should have protected her. Once the verdict was read and William Millman was sentenced to death, the courtroom fell silent, but the island did not. For weeks, whispers drifted through the towns and fields of Prince Edward Island questions, asked quietly at supper tables or behind closed church doors. Some believed justice had been served. Others weren't so sure. But either way, the case of Mary Tuplin was officially closed. The problem was, the answers never felt complete. From a legal standpoint, everything moved swiftly. William Millman was arrested in June 1887, tried, and executed by July of the following year. That alone is startling. In less than 14 months, the community went from discovering Mary's body to burying her alleged killer. No appeals. No retrial. No further investigation. And just like that, the story ended. Or at least, that's what they wanted people to believe. But the truth is, the trail didn't end. It just went cold. Even after William's execution, the unanswered questions persisted. What happened to the letter Mary read the day she disappeared? Who exactly wrote it? Why were her clothes destroyed so quickly after the trial? And if the murder weapon was never recovered, how could anyone be certain it was William who pulled the trigger? These weren't just legal questions. They were emotional wounds left open for her family, who never received true closure. Mary's parents, John and Mary Sr., never publicly spoke of their daughter's death again. Some say the grief was too heavy. Others suggest they feared further scandal. Her siblings, especially those old enough to remember the night she vanished, carried that pain for the rest of their lives. In small towns like Lot 11, memories have long shadows. What made the silence even more suffocating was the absence of any official effort to revisit the case. Once William was hanged, It was as though the island collectively agreed to forget. No formal cold case unit ever reopened it. No new suspects were pursued. The narrative had been decided, and to question it risked unraveling more than just a murder. It would mean confronting whether the wrong man had been condemned, or worse, whether the real killer had been protected. Still, rumors never stopped circulating. Over the decades, people spoke in hushed tones about alternative theories. Some said a well-known figure in the community had been involved and that Mary had threatened to expose him. Others whispered about a second lover or a jealous rival. None of these rumors were substantiated, of course. But what's telling is how persistent they were. For a case that was supposedly solved, it never truly faded from memory. There were even a few anonymous letters sent to the local newspaper in the early 1900s decades, after the murder, suggesting that the truth about Mary Tuplin had been buried deeper than her body. One letter, unsigned and never traced, stated simply, "The wrong man hanged for her." She knew too much. It was dismissed as gossip, but it left a chill in the air nonetheless. The passage of time has only made things murkier. In the absence of physical evidence, everything now rests on fragmented testimonies, faded newspaper clippings, and the oral traditions passed down through generations. Each retelling adds a layer of complexity and sometimes contradiction. Did the constables truly investigate every angle? Did they discard potential suspects too soon? And if the case were examined today with modern forensic tools, would the outcome be the same? We'll never know. There's never been a formal reopening of Mary Tuplin's case. No documentaries. No official historical inquiry. Just a handful of books and articles written by local historians trying to piece together what little remains. Some have pushed for her murder to be reclassified as an open case, arguing that the justice system failed both Mary and William. But even those efforts have stalled, and so the trail remains cold, not because it led nowhere, but because someone, somewhere, chose to stop walking it. What we're left with are haunting fragments. The image of Mary leaving her house at dusk, 6 months pregnant, stepping into the quiet shadows near the river. The borrowed boots. The missing letter. The absence of a murder weapon. A hasty trial. A hanging. And a silence that followed, not peaceful, but heavy and unspoken. In many ways, the mystery of Mary Tuplin is not just about a young girl's life being stolen. It's about a community's reluctance to confront the full truth, about the way justice can sometimes be rushed, and how certain questions, when they grow too inconvenient, are simply allowed to fade with time. But some stories don't go quietly. Even now, over 135 years later, the case of Mary Tuplin still lingers. Not as a solved crime, but as a question never fully answered. A chapter closed too quickly. A trail that still waits, quietly, for someone to follow it again. Thank you for joining us on this quiet and haunting journey into the forgotten story of Mary Tuplin. If you've heard of this case before, or have thoughts or theories about what might have really happened, we'd love to hear from you in the comments below. Stories like Mary's remind us how easily voices can be lost to time, and how important it is to keep asking questions, even when the answers are uncomfortable. If you found this story compelling, consider subscribing for more true crime cases like this, where silence speaks louder than words and every detail matters. We share deeply researched, emotionally reflective investigations into some of history's most unsettling and unsolved mysteries. Until next time, stay curious, stay thoughtful, and thank you for watching.